Okay, thank you very much, Jerry. So I'll just say a couple of words. This is the third of our 3 interviews with prominent current members of Scottish PEN as part of our Royal Society of Edinburgh sponsored project on the history of Scottish PEN. Sorry, I'm going to have to pause there.
Is that
make sure it's still there?
Just interrupted by my husband, so we'll start again.
Oh, I'm not forgiving John. If it had been Rosa the dog, that's fine. Tell John he's got a black mark.
No better. Anyway, I'll start again. So yeah, this is the first of 3 interviews with contemporary members of Scottish PEN on the history of Scottish PEN. And I'm going to pass over now to my colleague, Professor Gerry Carruthers, who's going to introduce our interviewee.
Thank you, Helen, and we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Mario Relich, sometime teacher at the Open University, a writer, critic, long-standing member of the PEN board. And that is indeed why we want to have a particular chat with Mario this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Shall I just kick off, Mary, by asking you to say a little bit about why you joined Scottish PEN, when that was, and you know, what sort of prompted your involvement with the organisation?
Yes. Well, I knew about it for quite a long time, and I knew that you know it supported writers who were persecuted in any way by governments or other organizations. And so I joined. This must have been, oh God, sometime in the last century. Anyway, so I joined. But I was what can be called a sleeping member, in the sense that I like to go to events and so on, but I simply paid my subscription and left it at that. Now, this is sometimes an item of debate, because I think there's nothing wrong with being a member who simply pays their subscription, occasionally goes to events and keeps in touch. That's all they want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, not everybody has to be an activist. But on the other hand, what sometimes annoys me is I have some writer friends. When I say to them, well, look, it'd be nice if you join. Oh, but I don't have the time to put into it. It doesn't matter whether you do or not. Your support would be great. But a lot of people just don't seem to understand that argument. There we are. So anyway, after a few years, I went to one of the annual meetings at the Storytelling Center, and one of the members asked me if I'd like to join the board. I hadn't considered it before, but why not? It was in fact Patrick Fraser. So I joined the board that way, and such a long time ago that I can't even remember how. Nearly 20 years, I would think. Anyway, that's how I joined the board.
So that was, yeah, sort of turn of the century.
Yeah.
So that was kind of, again, there seems to be a pattern that people are often surprised by the fact that they are invited to join, and they're not quite sure if they have, you know, that they also sense that you need to have certain writerly credentials, or you need to kind of pass a test or something like that. And
that's right.
That seems to be a kind of common pattern in the people that we've spoken to. And so in the time that you've been involved, what have been the kind of actions or the debates that have you've been most engaged with, or that you think have been most sort of significant or important in the development of Scottish?
Well, I've written them down, so I'll tell you which ones are particularly of interest to me. Well, first of all, being a delegate to the 2010 Writers for Peace Congress in Bled, Slovenia, I promoted J.F. Henry's little-known book, The Blackbird of Ospau. Do any of you know it? No? You do? Anyway, Blackbird of Ospau. It was published in 1945, and it is a series of interlinked short stories about the Italian occupation of Slovenian borderlands. It is virtually forgotten and mainly unread in Scotland, as far as I can tell. As the book is very much about a struggle for freedom, it should really have greater prominence in Scottish literary culture. It evidently needs to be reprinted. J.F. Henry is a by no means negligible modern Scottish writer. One of the Slovenian translators, Ratko Slokar, I'll spell that later, whom I've met in Bled, subsequently published a Slovenian translation of the book of great interest to Slovenians. I'm glad I got J.F. Henry out there. You want me to spell Ratko Slokar? Yeah, okay, Ratko is R-A-J-K-O, that's his first name. Slokar is L-O-K-A-R, his surname. So that's one thing. And well, researching for this Scottish Scottish pen history, doing all some of the research for it, and of course leading up to these events, and also the traveling exhibition in 2017 for the 90th anniversary. That's another one. And then, and I just mentioned supporting Andrew Tickell in formulating our official response to the proposed hate crime bill. So I'll just mention those. There's quite a few others.
Yeah. So so it's interesting that you mentioned the Congress, quite the importance of the Congress and and your attendance to that. Yeah. What was your how did you get on at the Congress? What was kind of surprising or
well
for you?
Well, first of all, it wasn't one of the annual PEN International Congresses.
Oh, okay.
It was a local congress in Slovenia.
Right.
Where they have an International Writers for Peace Committee, but delegates from all over the world, in fact. And I need not tell you that, yeah, the Slovenians had a large part of it, but the ones who dominated it were the French.
And why was that?
Well, I wonder myself.
Yeah.
Well, first, they had a lot of really, really good writers that were part of their committee. And somehow, I don't know, maybe they have a special relationship with Slovenia at the time, but they were really keen on taking part in this. So they just seemed to be quite dominant. But interestingly enough, and this was way back in 2010, they had an Uyghur well, they were exiled, of course, but they had their own pen center. They were delegates as well. It was a Taiwanese delegates. They were from quite a lot of very diverse countries, some Latin American ones and so on. And it was incredibly well organized. I mean, especially the translation services, because they're so complex. And you could sit there with your earphones and there'd be all sorts of languages on. So, and it was very friendly, and there were a lot of debates going on, lots of socializing. And it's in the socializing, in fact, that I met this Ratko Slokar. And yeah, in fact, my own contribution to the socializing was actually to have an evening of J.F. Henry. So that was so many things I did, and there was also the excursions to the hinterland, Slovenia, including the palace of a Renaissance intellectual. And it was very interesting to see. It's almost like a kind of Walter Scott, but he lived in the Renaissance. So that was one of the things I did. And this was, let's see, 2010. It wasn't that long after the breakup of Yugoslavia. but I got to know a Serbian poet, and incidentally, I'm not pro-Serb at all in that conflict, but anyway, I got to know a Serbian poet. His name was, oh dear, I forget his name now. Anyway, but he's sometimes been to Scotland, has had involvements in Scottish men. He's a very nice guy and not part of the, well, the more problematic, shall we say, Serbs during that war. But that was interesting for me as well.
I noticed, Mario, that from my, in some ways, quite basic researches so far, one of the many impressive things about Scottish PEN is its involvement in translation projects.
Oh,
and
yes.
I know you can say the same about other PEN centres across the world, but there's an interesting tension between translation, universality, and I've got an initial impression that I'm not sure that PEN always knows what to do with minority languages, whatever those mean.
Yes.
I wonder, could you reflect a bit on language, perhaps from the Scottish perspective, from the wider perspective? What would your thoughts be on that?
Well, that's certainly, in Scotland anyway, it's important to take account of Scots and Gaelic, and that we should, well, we should get as many Scots writers. Well, some of us board do write in Scots, and Gaelic ones. But we have a. I'm not sure I think we're still looking for a Gaelic member board, and we're pretty essential to that one. And I believe that Scottish PEN was highly involved. I get this from Paul Scott's autobiography, highly influential in getting this Declaration of Linguistic Rights organized as part of an International's remit.
Yes, I'm sure that's right. Because it's one of the things that PEN prides itself on is promoting all expression, in a sense.
Yes.
But something we were chatting about with Carol this morning, at the risk of being a wee bit simplistic, when PEN started in the 20s, it couldn't have envisaged some of the complexities that we're in today in terms of things like no platforming.
Oh yeah, oh God, yes.
The whole issue of expression is, in some ways at least, more complicated in the 21st century, yeah?
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. Oh yeah, it certainly is, yes.
And do you think that we as Scottish PEN do you think we've got a good handle on that? I mean, that's not supposed to be a leading question necessarily, but...
No, well, I'm not sure about that, I must say, because there was a recent, which you're pretty familiar with, recent issue having to do with one minority pressure group in the Scottish Poetry Library. And we intervened in that, and I wasn't sure it was wise to intervene. In the end, I supported the board just for the sake of solidarity, but I'm very uneasy that we should really get involved in that kind of.
Yeah, one of the problems is you're saying you've got different minority groups, different groups who in some ways we might crudely characterise as the good guys, but the good guys are, in some ways it was maybe easy when it was a fight against apartheid or the old Soviet bloc.
That's right.
We knew we were dealing with bad governments. Now there are kind of groupings, and it's very difficult to be fair to everyone, isn't it?
Yes. But you see, another thing I worry about is that, I think every minority group of any kind should have a voice, and their voice should be publicized, and there should be debates. I have no problem with that at all. But on the other hand, I worry about fragmentation. So what used to be called very significantly balkanization of society, because really we ought to have common values instead of continually emphasizing how we're different from everybody else.
Someone said to me recently, and I'm not sure I agree with it, but I could see the force of this, and it was kind of post-theory, postmodern thing. They said,
Yes.
oh, well, you know, you're part of PEN, you've got all these sort of liberal middle-class values about being fair to everyone, but
Yeah.
actually there are certain points at which you just have to choose sides. And
Yes,
that
well,
kind of disappointed me a bit, but didn't exactly
yes,
surprise me.
yes, yes. Well, that used to be what the communists always argued.
Yes. There are some quite totalitarian attitudes springing up, perhaps, within some groups.
Yes, I'm very sad to have to agree with you there.
Because they, you know, for most of PEN's history, it assumed it was operating within a relativity, a pluralism of values.
Yes, yes.
And maybe that is changing slightly, or maybe not.
Well, there are pressures for change, but PEN should resist them. Definitely resist them. And I certainly would argue against any giving in for any of these kinds of pressures.
Yeah, a slightly sort of prosaic question, Mario, but who do you recall? Who was the president of Scottish PEN when you came in? Carol will be your third or fourth president, I'm guessing.
It was Drew.
It was Drew.
Yeah,
Drew Campbell.
Yeah. Unless I'm trying to remember now. Yes, it was just after Tessa Ransford.
Tessa Ransford, who goes on to found the Scottish Poetry Library. And you mentioned
yes,
this
previously. Well,
in
fact, she did that first, and then.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes. And I was going to say this later, but she was instrumental in having our close relationship with the Edinburgh Council, which is very useful indeed. We have our office through the Sport and Rogers Museum. So and so it was Drew, and then wait a minute. It was actually not Drew, but Jenny.
Oh, it was Jenny at that point, yeah.
Yes, it was Jenny, yes.
Jenny would have been one of the first female president, maybe I'm havering.
Yes, and I think Tessa was before Jenny.
All right. But they would have been in the vanguard of women presidents.
Yes.
Because without being, you know, overcritical, and I might cover this a wee bit tomorrow, even in the second half of the 20th century, because we were, you know, society was a bit blind.
Yes.
In many ways, PEN, without being overcritical, was a very male organisation till quite recently.
Oh yes, this is quite true. Yes. In fact, in tomorrow's my talk on past Scottish PEN personalities, I've made sure there's women there as well. I talk about it.
Yes,
but not for politically correct reasons. But
no,
because they're very prominent as well. In spite of it being a very male.
Yeah, you would remember the formidable Mary Baxter.
Yes. But yes, indeed. But I don't know very much about her. So,
I knew Mary a wee bit, and she went on, of course, to work with the Scottish Book Trust. And the thing that I've kind of discovered in the archives, putting it all together, these connections, Scottish Poetry Library with Tessa, Mary and the Scottish Book Trust, PEN is much more a cornerstone of a bunch of organisations in a way that I didn't grasp, because the personnel is often the same.
Yes, absolutely, yes. But something, again, I was going to mention it later, but it seems appropriate to mention it. Some people confuse PEN with a kind of writers' trade union. It's not that. I mean, writers obviously need to get a better deal commercially and in terms of contracts, but that's not our function. That's other organizations.
Carl, Mario, can I ask you to say something about, because you were talking there about, you've done obviously a lot of work in the archive and looking into the extent to which, you know, records are available, to think about the history of Scottish PEN and think about its impact and how it's reported, you know, in newspapers and so on. what did you discover there? Were there any kind of surprises or anomalies that you were, you know, kind of thought were very notable? I mean, I'm sure we'll hear about some of these maybe tomorrow, but was the archive fruitful for you in that sense?
Nothing terribly surprising. I mean, the main thing is that that Scottish PEN, in a way, was a declaration of cultural independence. I mean, not in any blatant or obvious way. I think there was this feeling that, you know, Scotland has its own culture, its own literature. And this is how we. Again, I may as well mention William Power here.
Yeah.
He's a very, very significant figure. Very significant, because he established a principle that Scottish PEN can belong to any national group, whether they have a state or not. And sometimes not even necessarily a national group, but just people were interested in. There was one group that didn't represent the nationality, it didn't represent the state. I can't remember what they were. Whether they were Buddhists or whether they were something like that.
There was a Yiddish group. There
we are. Yes. Oh, that is interesting. Is it still in
I don't
existence?
think so, but I did see it. It was reported over a number of years.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah.
PEN News, where it lists the different centres.
Yes.
And the Yiddish centre exists through the 1930s, in fact. Yeah.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see when it stops.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
But I was interested because Carl and Jenny also mentioned the sense of the importance of the Scottish identity, and
yes.
I just wonder if you had any kind of thoughts about what sort of Scotland it celebrates, or what, you know, because you're saying it's not necessarily nationalistic, but what kind of sense of Scotland did PEN have, and maybe how has that changed?
Well,
you know, how Scottish is it?
Sorry. No, what did you just say?
I just, you know, how Scottish is it? How fundamental is it that it's the Scottish?
Scottish PEN itself. Well. I don't think it's through any deliberate policy, but because the people who run it on the board just happen people feel themselves Scottish in various different ways, and they know that Scottish PEN is a cultural organization. So, I mean, it just comes naturally, I think.
Yeah, one of the things I was quite interested in, Mario, and again, this is at the preliminary stage, but intruding a wee bit into Helen's territory, i.e. the earlier period, there's a strong sense that very good people in PEN in the 30s and 40s would say, oh, well, we both went to the Royal High School together, so I can phone up the whiskey company, or I can go to the Bank of Scotland. There really was something quite impeccably bourgeois, both in Edinburgh and in Glasgow terms. Do you think that has changed to any extent in your time?
Good question. I have to say it probably is still a fairly bourgeois organization, because I think it's changing a little bit. Well, you could see the reaction of the Women's Committee. I think that was a sign of people who don't want it to be a cozy little bourgeois club. I mean, I'm not saying I agree with their stance, but I feel that this is partly what.
Yeah, this comes out. I mean, not to breach any board confidentiality, but I think we could go so far as to say that at a recent board meeting, the Women's Committee felt that the board were intruding a little bit into its territory
Yes,
in
yes,
nominating a
yes,
speaker for the Naomi Mitchison lecture. And my reading
yes,
of it was, there was more a kind of a slight misunderstanding, a slight miscommunication. But
yes,
nonetheless, I think what you're pointing to, Mario, is a bit more sense of devolving the sense of who's entirely in charge of things.
yes,
And,
yes,
you
yes,
know, that's no doubt a good thing in general.
yes, yes. Yeah,
Also,
that's
sorry, does that also relate to the geography of Scotland, Jerry and Mario, in the sense that is PEN perceived as a central belt organization, particularly as because they very much, I mean, a lot of the activities do center in Glasgow or Edinburgh, don't they?
yes,
And I know it was very, you know, the origins of PEN were very much against that. They were about having these sections in Dundee and Aberdeen and the Gallup
yes,
section, and
absolutely,
they
yes,
all had their representation. And I wonder whether that somehow the geography of the country has sort of been in tension with that and has brought things, tried to bring things back to the two big cities. And I don't know if that's still a tension.
yes. Well, you have somebody like Drew who lives in where was it again?
Is it the Macbeth place?
Yes, yes, not Tansinane anyway.
Yeah, Perthshire,
Yes,
darkest Perthshire. He
yes,
said,
yes,
showing his central beltism.
yeah, yes, yeah. Well, yeah, that's but that seems to be a problem. A lot of Scotland, how it's run politically and socially, and is kind of reflected in Scotland, I suppose, as well. But not because we deliberately want to be to be to be just centrally located. But another factor is you notice that all three of the PEN International conferences in Scotland are in Edinburgh.
Mm.
And there is, we've recently discussed the possibility, it's still a very early stages, maybe because Aberdeen has got in touch with a international conference in Aberdeen. It would be a good thing if it can be done.
Mm. Yeah, let's try and decentralize things again.
Yeah. But that, of course, sorry, that also applies to Gaelic, because Gaelic is concentrated in the north. So, yeah.
We talked in the other conversations a bit about the future and anticipating, you know, future challenges, and I know we kind of touched on those at the beginning through Jerry's question, and one of the issues that I think Jenny raised was the issue of the, you know, you were talking about bourgeois, a kind of
yes,
bourgeois flavor, but also she was suggesting that there was a danger of having an older membership and not you know, not necessarily always getting new blood, and also the fact that I suppose the organization relies a lot on volunteer time.
Yes.
And that time often belongs to people at a more senior point
Yes.
in their career, or indeed when they're retired. And those younger writers are much more, you know, time poor in a way.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, about the kind of age balance in the organization and how it's tackling that. Or
yes, I think there tends to be a lot of dogmatism about that, because when people are younger, you know, they have to concentrate on their jobs, their families, and so on. They just don't have as much time. Now to think that because older people have more time, how dare they get involved in it? You know, they're too old. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, everybody in society can contribute. And if older people can contribute more, well, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as they're open to ideas from everywhere. And the organization is open to young people as well. And it is. there's no barriers to young people getting involved. The other thing is, younger people are not always as committed to anything outside their own local interests. And that, again, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're young, you like, you often like to have I mean, I'm not being patronizing here because I feel adults like that, right? Have a good time, and not get terribly involved in anything outside your own local interests. But that gradually changes as you get older. So I think it's just a natural development. So long as older people who volunteer to take part in those organizations aren't hidebound in any way. On the other hand, when you look at our project managers, they've been really good. Lately, they've been extremely good, and our current one is extremely good. They're young people.
I wonder, Carol, Mario, we've had a long day. Mario, I wonder, we've been thinking.
I've taken over. I've had a
Yes. One of the issues, arguably, and there's nothing we can do about this anywhere in society, there is more and more compliance. There are more and more regulations. And, as you well know, Mario, recently we've had a discussion on the board about ethics and ethics compliance, and all of that is well and good. But there's a kind of level of time input now that's becoming more and more difficult in some ways, both for a part-time project officer and for the boards. Without being too personal about it, I might want to ask you, do you feel that there's a danger of being a bit overwhelmed, becoming impatient by the amount of compliance, etc., or does that not bother you so much?
Yes, I am uneasy about that kind of thing. Yes, there's bureaucratic interference. Yeah, I am. And also this spurious notion of it. Well, I mean, I'm for equality, but not a dogmatic way of looking at equality. That it has to be. I don't know. Every organization has to have that number of women, that number of people of a certain class, that number of people of a certain ethnicity. I can't be bothered with that. Sorry.
And sometimes we just have to take the good people that we can get, whoever they are. And it's quite difficult to say, oh, we need them, but it's very difficult to engineer balances with the best will in the world. Yes.
And well, I mean, in a more general sense, I'm not very keen on identity politics. I really am not. It's what we have in common that, for me, is much more important than what we are individually.
Yeah.
And anyway, individualism economically leads to people just shopping. And that meaning of life, I mean, trying to get us. Sorry?
I'm just going to say that's been really interesting. I don't know if you have any further questions, Jerry. We could probably keep talking for ages.
Well, we could. I think more of this will come out tomorrow, obviously, and that's well and good. And the great thing for me, the chat with you, Mario, and Helen, and earlier with Carol, it's really helping me for tomorrow, quite frankly, get my head around things a bit more. I hope that's happening for us all, because I kind of hope tomorrow will be an informed and informative chat, but not over definitive. I mean, it can't be, because frankly, Helen and I have been sort of stopped in our tracks in pursuing this research. I think we've both done some reasonable stuff, but I mean, I'm at the situation where I've done really a tenth of what was intended by this point, and that, for once, is not my laziness, but is unavoidable.
Yes. Well, that's okay. Yeah. Well, but let's put it this way: I prefer communitarianism to individualism.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. That's a good note to end on, Helen, isn't it?
I think so. That's been tremendous. Thank you very much for that, Mario.
Thanks, Mario.
And I'm really looking forward forward to your talk tomorrow and
Yeah.
to further conversation with you in the kind of panel event. So fantastic. Thank you very much.
Excellent.